Welcome to Focus on Why. I'm Amy Rowlandson, your host. Join me to explore the compelling stories, profound insights, and captivating experiences shared by my guests from all over the world, focusing on the importance of why these relatable, uplifting, and inspiring conversations will empower, motivate, and guide you to create your own purposeful way of life. Have a purpose, have a plan, focus on why. Do you truly understand the power of a focus on why in business? Are your employees fully engaged? Do they consider their work meaningful? Or does your organisation have purpose gaps? Focusing on key areas of employee engagement, contribution, fulfilment, well-being and purpose, all of which have proven links to increased productivity and profitability, I deliver inspiring, mesmerising and captivating talks and workshops providing clear, actionable steps to take. To discuss your specific business needs, reach out to me via the link in the show notes and together we can plug those purpose gaps. Today on Focus on Why, I am joined by Charlie Hart. Hello, Charlie.
Hi, Amy. Thanks for having me.
Oh, you're very welcome. I am really looking forward to hearing your focus on why. But first, let's ask you the simple question of what is it you're focusing on at the moment?
I'm focusing on speaking about and writing content about neurodiversity and related themes. So really it's about understanding, accepting, celebrating even the fact that each human brain and mind is different and that we all process the world and think and feel and respond in different ways. And moreover, that is a wonderful thing and it's a thing to celebrate and it gives us advantages as a species.
So the very fact that you've just said that we all process the world in different ways, and yet there seems to be this divide between neurotypical and neurodiverse. And yet it seems to be not as simple as just those two areas.
Yeah. I don't use the word neurotypical myself usually because I think it's a little bit insulting to people that don't know what it is that is different about their own brain and mind, because we are all different. So I kind of reframe it a little. And the definitions I use, I don't know them word for word because I do paraphrase, but I take them from the work of Dr. Nick Roberts. Dr. Nick Walker. Yeah, I'm rubbish with names. Dr. Nick Walker, she's one of the pioneers of the neurodiversity movement. And there's a lot of definitions in her book, Neuroqueer Heresies, and on her website. But neurodivergent basically means that your brain, it functions in ways which they differ from societal ideas of typical. So it isn't even a biological thing that some people have a typical brain. It's just that they may appear to be more normal or normal passing to the dominant society that they live in. So it's kind of quite a Western and Northern hemisphere and very white way of looking at it to say that some people are normal and others are not.
Agreed. And what is it that has brought you into speaking and writing about this particular space?
Oh, that's a very big question. So do stop me if I ramble on too much. But I've always been a bit different. And going right back to when I was a kid, we knew that my brother was autistic. He has learning disabilities as well. So for him, he went to special school. And yes, you heard that right. He's special. I'm not. Yeah. But as far as everyone knew, I was normal. What even is normal? It's a mode on Minecraft, according to my kid, and not even the best mode. But I wasn't identified as having any disabilities or anything different about me or wrong with me. But I was a bit quirky. I was a bit of a loner. I had unusual interests and they were unusually intense. I was never part of the crowd. I wasn't very fashionable. I was quite clever. So I wouldn't go so far as to say academically gifted because I wasn't very good at focusing on my work and doing my homework and things like that. But I've always been bright. But I struggled, and I struggled a lot with bullying as well. So the school that I went to we had no uniform, which sounds great, but it wasn't, because what it meant is that the kids that had got the money to follow the fashions and trends, they were the kids that were popular and acceptable, whereas I had some homemade clothes, some handed down clothes, some cheap clothes off the market that were not on brand. So I was never good enough. I wasn't an acceptable human being in that school. But I got good GCSEs, but when I got to A levels, I started to struggle a little. And then when I got to university, I completely fell off the rails. So I was really lucky that despite leaving university without a degree and in quite a lot of debt and with rock bottom self-esteem, I fell into HR quite by chance and discovered that I like HR, but the technical and analytical and project management kind of side of HR. So 15 years then into a career as an HR systems specialist, I then found out that my son was autistic. And when he went through that process of getting diagnosed, I realized that everything they were saying about him was also true of me. So he and I together went through the diagnostic process. And at the age of 42, after 15 years of struggling and not knowing why, after 15 years of chronically being overwhelmed and regularly burning out and being signed off work with depression, doing all the self-care, battling my demons, taking the antidepressants, whatever I needed to do, and bouncing back stronger. 15 years of that. And I thought there was something very broken. But then I found out, no, there's not something wrong with me. I've got a different neurotype. I'm autistic. My brain is wired differently. I need to do things a little differently. I need to self-advocate for my needs. I need to identify what is causing me to become overwhelmed and to burn out. And so I became very, very interested in self-advocacy. Now, around that time, I saw a couple of talks at work, not from other autistic speakers, but from other speakers who spoke from lived experience, who had something different about them that they wanted people to understand. So one of them spoke about transitioning. She was a trans woman who, along with her wife, who's also a trans woman, I can say that because they are openly trans. They set up a company called Global Butterflies, which teaches people about trans and non-binary inclusion in the workplace with a lot of lived experience. So it isn't a training course, it captures the hearts and minds. You really care about what she's gone through and what she's achieving and how she's making the world better for other people that are going through that transition. There was another speaker who spoke about menopause and how it affected her in the workplace and how it's different for different people, but for her in particular, she was a police sergeant and her menopause caused her to be chronically overwhelmed and extremely anxious and struggling to cope in a job that she had excelled in for decades. So I thought, great, I would like to talk about autism. And then I discovered neurodiversity. So to me, somebody who felt broken for so long, I discovered the neurodiversity paradigm. And what that is, neurodiversity is a concept that conveys that every brain and mind is different. The neurodiversity paradigm takes it a little further and it says every human brain is unique and different, and that's a good thing. It doesn't mean that some brains are good and others are bad. It doesn't mean that some brains are great and others are defective. So, and then there's the neurodiversity movement, and that's like a social justice movement. So I'd already been following LGBT activists who are fighting for equal rights, and the neurodiversity movement shares a lot in common with that. It's saying, yes, we have these differences. We're still people. We still contribute to society. We need a level playing field. We need to be able to succeed in our roles, in our lives, in society, without facing barriers and discrimination and stigma. So it really captured my imagination. And I started to talk about neurodiversity, acceptance and inclusion in the workplace, focusing on autism. But then I realized that I have ADHD as well. I've, I've been diagnosed with ADHD more recently, but I also have complex PTSD. So that's an acquired neurodivergence. But I started to do, my first speaking event was about autism inclusion. And I did that not long at all after diagnosis, but I had extensively researched my subject. And there was a lot of interest. I worked for the Solicitors Regulation Authority at the time in HR, and 50 people came to my event in the Birmingham office, and then another 45 in the London office. So, and I loved it. I really liked being able to speak to a lot of people at once about something that I thought could be impactful to them, whether they might be autistic themselves or they manage somebody who is or work with someone who is. Maybe they've got an autistic child or someone else in their family, someone they care about. There isn't anybody that goes through life without knowing autistic people. But I didn't realize quite how interested people would be. And took it from there to speaking about neurodiversity with an ADHD friend, Helen May. So we teamed up together, and then bouncing off each other, it made it even better. So after a while, I kind of lost interest in my HR systems day job, and it's all I want to do. It's like when you can find something that you can do for a living that helps people, and that is your special, highly focused interest. It's an absolute win-win.
And it's so interesting, Charlie, that when you said you left university and your self-esteem was at rock bottom, that you managed to find an environment such as HR, which is actually supporting you in the best possible way in terms of that particular space in the workplace.
Yeah, and I didn't even know I was autistic, but it's just they noticed what things I was good at and gave me more of those things, and it was on the HR analytical side. And when someone who's autistic and ADHD is supported and allowed to lean into their strengths, they can be the most what's the word? They can stay for a really long time. They can be very loyal and very committed. So that was me in that particular job for 17 years.
And it's really interesting. You said it captured your imagination, these speakers coming in. What is it that you can imagine is possible from your speaking?
Yeah, so there's a ripple effect. When you stand up and speak about something that affects you, and it could be a protected characteristic like race or gender. It could be one of those things, or it could even be something you've been through, like a major trauma or bereavement. But when we stand up and share those stories, other people I quite often find them relatable and think, oh, it's not just me. Sometimes those people step up then and speak about their experience. If not standing on a stage and speaking, it might be they write blogs. It could be that they do magazine articles, or it could be all sorts of things, but people start to open up and it has a ripple effect. And I think one of the most stark that I've seen that in is when people talk about suicide, and when they've survived suicide, or they've lost somebody to suicide. There's so many perspectives, and it's something that never used to be talked about. And I've been to a survivor. I lost my son. Sorry, I probably should have given you a trigger warning there. I just came out with that. I just get very focused and things come out. But I've been to a suicide survivors group where almost everybody there was talking about how it was a bolt from the blue, whereas a lot of what you used to read online or watch on the telly or in workplace talks about suicide, it used to constantly emphasize that it's to do with depression and anxiety. So you've got a lot of people saying, I would rather have a phone call from you in the middle of the night than go to your funeral. my kettle's on, my door's open, and they think that suicide just happens when somebody is isolated and depressed. But when you read more about it, stories from people that have survived it or lost somebody and talk about it now, it's way more than that.
Tell me more.
So I'm really rambling. I'm really rambling, I think. But yeah, so for instance, suicide is far more common in autistic individuals. And I can't put an exact figure on it because even if I gave you the statistic, when you bear in mind that I didn't know I was autistic until I was 42, and that a lot of people go through life without a diagnosis, even if they strongly suspect that they're autistic, a lot of them don't get diagnosed. So any stat you read about the prevalence of autism among people who die through suicide or people who have mental health crisis or unemployment figures, anything like that, you've always got to take it with a massive pinch of salt. But we are far more likely to end our lives. And I know that when I've gone through phases where I've thought I cannot cope anymore, I need to escape this life, it's always been when I've been in meltdown. So I have a theory that many suicides, like a huge proportion of them, are caused by people having extreme autistic meltdowns that they cannot de-escalate from. And the same can be said about ADHD as well. So it's well documented that suicide is a lot more likely to happen among the ADHD community. Nobody really knows why. I don't think, apart from our lives are harder. It's like we have the game of life set on a harder level. And we can strategize when we know we've got ADHD, and medication helps a bit, but it's still always going to be really hard. But there's also the fact that with ADHD, you can have something that looks very much like a meltdown as well. And what I'm thinking of is emotional regulation, emotional dysregulation, and also rejection sensitive dysphoria. So if somebody says something to me where I feel rejected or criticized, even if it's only perceived and it wasn't really such a bad thing for them to say or not say, even sometimes it's what they don't say. But when you have a rejection sensitive dysphoria reaction, it can feel like a real gut punch, and you can sometimes think, I can't get past this. It's quite similar to an autistic meltdown, and because I have both, I can't really tell you which is which. I look back on some of the times in my life where I've absolutely lost my shit, and I couldn't tell you whether it was a meltdown or a emotional dysregulation or a RSD attack. But I do know that I felt like I needed to escape. I couldn't carry on like that. And that even after it passes, that you end up feeling such a sense of self-loathing almost, and dread and shame. There's a lot of shame. If you lose control and you're lashing out physically or verbally or in any kind of way like that, it can leave you feeling really ashamed. So these things they're traits of neurodevelopmental differences rather than being mental health issues. But there's a strong link with suicide. And the more we understand each other, even if you look at relationships, so my second husband and I had quite a volatile relationship for the first few years. It was always passionate, but we always used to, if one of us had a meltdown and we had a bit of a row, the other would be in meltdown then. We didn't know we were autistic and we didn't know we were ADHD. We just knew it was absolutely awful and like the end of the world until we de-escalated, and then it wasn't. So now that we know about this stuff and we know about rejection sensitivity, we don't row so much. And if we do, we de-escalate it quicker. and neither one of us feels like leaving or ending it all or anything. So it's so important to understand how your brain works and to know how to calm down.
What I'm hearing here, Charlie, is that there's almost this life before diagnosis and life after.
Yeah.
And that the way that you even reflect upon it is different. So yes, you can go back and you can understand what happened and why that was the case. It doesn't make it any less difficult, because obviously there are challenging times. How do you see your life now, understanding the several diagnoses that you've got, your autism, your complex PTSD and your ADHD? How do you give yourself almost some kind of understanding and acceptance?
Yes. So a lot of people might think, oh, why is she collecting so many labels? To me, those are they're keys. Each of my diagnoses is a key to understanding how my mind works. And then it's also a key to self-compassion. If I know that something is going to be particularly difficult to me, it doesn't necessarily mean I'll avoid it altogether, but I'll be ready for it. And I will definitely ensure that there's time to recover from it. So everything I do now, I'm thinking, is this in my best interest? Is this going to send me off the rails, or is this going to be good for me? Is this worth the emotional drain? Is it worth the mental effort? Usually, yes. But it's a learning process. It started really with 6 years ago, my diagnosis. So a couple of years before the pandemic, I talked about how I would thrive a lot better in my role if I could work from home 2 days a week, work in the office 2 days a week. And on the office days, if I could cycle to work and back, could I start a little bit later so that I'm not traveling during rush hour? It's little things like that means that I've been able to change my life, my working life and other aspects of my life so that I can thrive as who I am, rather than trying to change my mind and change who I am.
Yeah, I hear you. And what I want to understand is the podcast is called Focus on Why. How much does purpose fit into the work you're doing and who you are?
Yeah. So a lot. I mean, part of why I do what I do is because I just really enjoy it. I get a buzz out of being on stage and delivering a speech and getting good feedback, or even the same in a webinar. I love it. I used to act when I was in my teens. I was an amateur dramatics kid. So yeah, I like being in the limelight. But more of a reason is that I want to help other people. But it's partly to help the me that struggled for so long, undiagnosed and not knowing what my needs were and how to get them met. But it's also because I want the future to be easier for kids like my daughters, who are also neurodivergent. They're also LGBT like me. And I mean, their generation are brilliant. They're far more accepting of human differences anyway, and they're way more likely to self-advocate, and they've got the language to do it. But I still feel like I need to have a message proliferate out across society saying different is okay. It's not a bad thing. In fact, it's an advantageous thing. If we think about things differently, this is how we innovate. This is how teams work better. People have been talking about team dynamics for a really, really long time. Yeah, it's neurodiversity, basically. Some people will excel at certain things and others at other things, and that's how you put a good team together. It's not rocket science, but I want to make things better for them. And one of the reasons for that is because my eldest child, well, he would have been my oldest child if he was still here. We tragically lost him to suicide at the age of 15. So he had been struggling and he hadn't really talked a lot about it. He never he had some mental health support, but he never took time off school. He kept going. He kept planning for the future. But it's only now, since losing him, that we know that he was struggling with how to cope with being autistic, how to cope with being gay. We knew he was being bullied at school, but we didn't know that it was going to have such a devastating impact to him and to everyone that knew and loved him. I can't turn the clock back, but I would like to help make the world a more accepting, more inhabitable place for others like him.
Charlie, it's really, I'm trying to describe the words that I'm thinking of. And obviously, I'm sorry for your loss, and I'm sorry that this has happened to you and your family. There is a great purpose coming through your work and through what it is that you're looking to achieve to overcome these barriers and stigma and discrimination and the bullying that's out there. You and I are find ourselves in an environment where we are supported by so many, and we see this space and we embrace this space, and we have a lot of people who also do the same. I struggle to understand why it wouldn't be the norm
Yes.
for everyone to be this open.
Me too. But I see it happen. I see parents who might they might take the mickey or pour derision on, or worse, someone who's different from themselves with their kids in earshot. They're bringing their kids up to believe that it's okay to mock people for being different, mock them or worse, or fear them. You hear parents talking about refugees and asylum seekers in dehumanizing language in front of their kids. It's not surprising, really, that those kids grow up to be vile themselves and to not have any respect for other humans who are not like them.
So it's learned behavior, and it's coming from majority of the home, albeit there is also issues within the education system. It's not perfect. And I've spoken to previous guests who have had children that have been victimized for various issues that they've brought to the table. And it was the teacher's bias, not anything that the children had been doing themselves.
Yeah.
It's out there. I'm not denying it, and I'm aware of it. And I remember talking to one of my fabulous guests back in lockdown post the whole George Floyd incident, and he was talking about how he didn't want it to be another false dawn, that we feel like there's a big uprising and support for a particular issue. For that, it was in support for equal rights, for understanding more about the whole being Black in America, and very difficult in that space. It's still there. It's constant. I don't feel as though there is we're almost 5 years on from that particular incident, and it's actually, I would say that the tide is going back. It's turning the wrong way.
It's very concerning. And Black Lives Matter, that whole movement. I mean, obviously I don't think people should be murdered for being Black, even if they've stolen something. I'm very, very firmly with the Black Lives movement, but I think it started although they did good work, I think it started a backlash. So, and where we are now, because I, as well as being a neurodiversity advocate, I'm a LGBTQIA+ activist, and I'm particularly a trans and non-binary ally, because they're humans trying to live their lives, but they're being scapegoated I think mainly by government, who are trying to deflect attention away from whatever shady stuff they're doing. And it's so unjustified. And you're talking about a very vulnerable minority. But you see that in other characteristics as well. I wouldn't be at all surprised if neurodiversity gets dismissed as woke nonsense and we can't push the agenda for neurodiversity inclusion. I'm not even worried about that, because this is a bigger issue. We need to do something about the fact that we're all humans and we all need to be treated with respect and compassion. So the direction I see DEI taking, instead of focusing on diversity characteristics, I see it moving towards accepting that every human deserves respect and inclusion and compassion, and treating us like adults. So we should have options over where we work and what hours we work and things like that. That will naturally then lend itself to being easier to cope with for people with ADHD, for instance. I might spend 3 hours staring out of the window one morning and then have some 11sies or something, and then do a 10-hour hyper-productive sprint of writing. If I can lean into my strengths and the ebb and flow of my work, then I'm more productive. So I think that this will come with Gen Z anyway. They will advocate for their wants, needs, and preferences, and employers need to catch up with them.
I agree. And I saw some brilliant Gen Z speakers the other day, and it was talking to a group of MDs from companies, explaining their way of working and where they may be perceived for being lazy because they want to work these flexible hours. As you've just proven, there's no efficiency in 9 to 5 for all. Yes, I understand why you have frameworks of being in the office between these hours, but now there's so much more flexibility, and you are aware that people work in different ways. I'm with you. I'm the neurodiverse. I can be daydreaming or I can be in hyperfocus, and don't judge me on either.
Yeah. So many of us are self-employed, yeah, which is working out pretty well for a lot of us. But we shouldn't all have to be. We can be we can be contributing our awesomeness of our spiky profiles in the business world as well, and all sorts. So they're really missing a trick, I think, by it's not even not hiring us, because there's loads of neurodivergent hiring programs. It's not allowing us to thrive in our roles by giving us agency over how we work.
So this self-advocacy, this self-agency as well, and understanding what it is that we can bring to the table, what it is that we are different in whatever way. For you to sort of say about the key thing is we're all just humans trying to live our lives.
Yeah.
Right. That was at the core. I really heard that message. And it seems to be that some people believe that they have the right to tell others how to live their lives.
This is one of the real major problems. But another one, related but slightly different, is people who don't understand that others don't experience the world and process in the same way as they do. So it can be something as simple as if I'm affected by bright sunlight and I've forgotten my sunglasses and I say it's really bright, and the other person's saying it's not that bright. It can be something as simple as that. I've heard so many people say, don't hide behind emails. If you want to have an interactive discussion with someone, wander over to their desk or pick up the phone. And I just want to say, I want to shake them and say, no, that's good for you. It's not good for everyone. We're all different.
So what's the way that we can all help one another to be who we are without, as you just said, dismissing something in a casual, it's not that bright comment. Actually, you're sort of not acknowledging that the other person has said it is. And just because it's not that bright for you doesn't mean it's not that bright for others. I have this conversation regularly with my husband, and it's a case of I will say something and he doesn't mean it. He's trying to understand what's going on for me, but it really does. It can hurt sometimes. So what is it that we can do? There's no one way, I'm sure. I said, what's the way we can do this? But the conversations that we can have, where do we start to bring everybody into a more inclusive space?
That's a really big question, but I think just taking the time to hear what the other person is saying, to believe them, and to reflect and not just dismiss it out of hand. So many of us are charging through lives, getting this and that done, and sometimes we need time to reflect. So to my husband and I mentioned earlier we had a really volatile relationship the first few years. Now that we know that we understand we see things differently from one another, and we'll quite often go for an argument post-mortem walk. So we've had our argument and a couple of days have passed and now we're calm again. We'll go out for a walk and maybe have a little bit of a side-eye conversation, totally non-confrontational, about where the disagreement lay and why tempers got fraught, how we could do it better in future. It is all about taking the time to listen. And there's a lot of stereotypes out there about autistic people lacking empathy, and I'd just like to say now I think that's absolute nonsense. That's not autistic people, that's psychopaths. But even autistic people like my brother who have got serious developmental challenges and intellectual disabilities, the ones I know have all got really good empathy. So if someone's upset or they've lost someone or they're anxious, we pick up those feelings. But what's important for the problem that you just posed is the cognitive empathy. So it's taking the time to think and to put yourself in the other person's shoes. And you have to look at it through their lens. You have to imagine what it would be like. My husband and I and one of his friends were having a long conversation. We went out for a drink at our local pub the other night, and we're having a long conversation about aphantasia, which is when you don't have a mind's eye and you can't picture something. And I forget what the term is, but the opposite of that, having a vivid mind's eye. And that's what I'm like, and our friend Steve is like. My husband, Si, he doesn't have the mind's eye. So we were trying to explain what that's like, and he was trying to explain what it's like for him. And it really requires a lot of thought. So it's completely the same when someone's struggling with something in the workplace, I think. Si and I both, we've both got a really vivid audio memory as well. So we're musicians and singers, and if we hear a song, we hear it a few times, we know it well. We can play it in our own heads, not just the vocals, we can play pretty much all the parts, and we know exactly what it sounds like, but other people can't. So we were struggling to understand how people weren't getting a tune right or weren't getting the rhythm of a line in a song right. And it's because they don't have that strong, vivid auditory memory. So you have to learn something in a different way. And it's really no different in the workplace.
There's so much, and I'm sure that there will be more that we will understand as time goes on. I'm hoping that this whole neurodiversity won't be the woke thing that you mentioned. It could, people could actually say and dismiss it. I don't think it will. I think it'll just be a case that we identify more and more different elements to it, the layers that have. I hadn't heard of aphantasia. That's amazing. I just checked, but hyperphantasia is the opposite.
Yes.
So there we go. I am
Makes
definitely
sense.
the hyperphantasia, and yet I know that people who are aphantasia, I didn't even know it was a thing though, but now that you've put a name to it, I didn't realize that was a thing. When I listen back to my podcast sometimes, Charlie, I say the opposite word or thought in my sentence comes out to what I actually meant.
Yes.
And it's only because I've got it recorded that I believe that it was said. In a conversation, often with my husband, I will say something that he hears that is not what I think I said, and I will be adamant that I said what I thought I said.
That's really common with ADHD. I think it's a working memory thing.
It's unbelievably inaccurate for me, and it's very frustrating. He's more used to it than I am, because he can hear exactly what I'm saying, whereas I'm not hearing what I'm saying, because I'm hearing what I think I said, which is difficult because then I don't understand why people don't hear what I've said. So
I do it too, if it makes you feel any better.
Thank you.
I've got my own podcast, and on that I was talking about when you think you're in love with someone, but it's just an autistic, highly focused special interest in a person, and it's like infatuation times 10. And there's a word for that, limerence. But I said there's a word for that, sibilance. Sibilance is like the kind of hiss that you might hear on the microphone if someone's going they're reading the Gruffalo and the snake in his log pile house. I just got the words mixed up. My mum says rhubarb when she means beetroot, and vice versa, and doesn't even know she's done it.
So a quirky thing that I have is I put in the opposite word for lots of things, and I've been doing it since I was a kid. So if I want to say hot, I'll say cold. If I want to say left, right, that's a very common thing anyway, but it really is a weird programming thing that I have. So Charlie, thank you for stepping up and speaking and bringing to the attention of everybody who is lucky enough to see one of your talks or one of your webinars, or to help them understand, to accept, to celebrate that we're all processing the world in very different ways, that there are lots of different elements that we all bring to the table, and it's about understanding how these jigsaw pieces all fit, because they do fit, they do create the incredible picture. And if they're
greater than the sum of its parts,
and
you're a diverse population.
Absolutely. We are humans just trying to live our lives with respect, compassion, and inclusion. So let's create this incredible, beautiful world that you are passionate about. So thank you. How could people reach out, follow your work, connect with you?
I'm on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram. I might come off those with the Meta's recent announcement about rolling back their DEI, but I'm on YouTube, TikTok. LinkedIn is my biggest platform. So everywhere, look for Ausome Charlie with an AU for autistic, and you'll find me on all those places. And you can email me as well. It's charlie@ausomecharlie.co.uk. Awesome with an AU for autistic, because I'm openly autistic and proud of it.
Well, so you should be. And thank you so much for sharing your focus on why. All of those links are in the show notes. Charlie, I wish you all the best with your mission to achieve. And I really do think that there is a strong future, albeit, there's lots of instances that would indicate otherwise. I do think that we've got a very bright future that we can work with. And you're right, the Gen Z are great advocates for the wants, needs, and the difference that can be made. Have you got some final words for the listener, please?
Yeah. Accept us, believe us. Yeah. We are all different, and we do see the world how we tell you we see it, and if we're struggling with something, we've probably been struggling for some time before even voicing it. So yeah, let's just all treat each other like humans with compassion and respect and believe each other.
What value have you gained from tuning into Focus on Why today? What are your reflections with actions? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Please leave a review on Apple Podcasts or via LinkedIn and share how Focus on Why has made a difference to you. Your feedback not only will inspire others, but will help them to discover how Focus on Why has created powerful ripple effects. Let's continue the conversation. Connect with me on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook or X, join the Focus on Why Facebook group, and sign up for my weekly newsletter, Friday Focus, to keep in touch. All the links are in the show notes. Have a purpose, have a plan, focus on why.